Hi, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the session on securing supply chain of transaction processing at DSCI FinSec Conclave 2022. So I'm Harshita Singhal, consultant here at DSCI. I would like to extend my thank you to everyone who have joined this session and who have attended the session so far. So with that now, I would like to invite the panelists of this session on the stage. So first, I would like to invite Mr. Srihari Kotni. He is VP and CISO at Pine Labs. Hi, Mr. Srihari. Welcome to the session. So Mr. Srihari will be the moderator of the session as well. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Swati Sharma, leader CISO office at Amazon Pay. Hi, Swati. Welcome to the session. Next, I would like to call Mr. Venugopal, CISO Equitas Small Finance Bank Limited. Hello, Mr. Venugopal. Welcome to the session.
Thank you.
And finally, I would like to call Ms. Ritu Verma. She is Head Compliance Newtap Finance Private Limited. Hello, Ms. Ritu. Welcome all panelists. So now I would like to hand over to Mr. Srihari to moderate this session. Thank you. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Srihari.
Thank you, Harishita. Good morning and namaste to all. My name is Srihari Kotni, working as Chief Information Security Officer for Pine Labs Private Limited in India, as well as the global operations. Right. So it's a wonderful morning and wonderful session. Very interesting session. I think I thank DSA for inviting me and giving me opportunity. So just I would like to start this session. Incidentally, our Honorable Prime Minister, what he said at ISB yesterday, that India is the leader today in online payments, right? I think our payments today stand at 48 billion transactions, which is 3 times to what happens in China. And the 40% of online transactions are happening in India. So I think India is the clear leader in online payments, whether it could be our leaders' vision, right? When they wanted to make India as a cashless country, right? To address some other problems like black money, etc. But however, the leadership vision and a kind of push and the regulators' support and the number of ecosystems that have come up in India clearly helped India to achieve this position. So just before starting the session, just I would like to give some few numbers. So I have mentioned that actually India today have 48 billion transactions, right? And we expect that these transactions will be becoming 63 billion in by 2026. That is the prediction, right? And also some, not all transactions are actually, kind of UPI kind of thing, but it's a combination of is the interbanking transactions, the UPI transactions, credit card transactions, etc. So NEFT across 226 banks today, in last month, they were around 37 crores, right? And we have one news is that the e-commerce transactions using the credit cards are 70% above the card swipe transactions, right? So that means that there are a lot of transactions are happening over the e-commerce, like online shopping, etc. Then actually, people take a credit card and actually go to the shop and swipe the card, right? So there's a lot of online transactions are happening. So UPI transactions are around 45 billion transactions last year, right? And we have credit card transactions in India are happening at 2 billion transactions, and they are going to become 5 billion transactions in next 4 years, right? So these are the few numbers, and definitely there are a lot of players involved actually in making this particular digital transactions, right? So what we call it a supply chain of transactions. The reason is that number of players are involved. It's not just banks alone. So number of other new fintech providers, the number of innovations are happening. The innovations are not just financial services. It can be KYC service providers or telecom operators who actually give their network. There is a the social media like WhatsApp payments, etc. They are actually coming. They are contributing a lot in this digital payments. So So this is basically in supply chain of transactions, right? Today, earlier, remember, actually, we used to go and actually, go to the bank, take a token, and wait for half an hour to get our payment, right? But today we have come long way in last 30 years, right? Today we don't need to do anything, just take the mobile phone and make the transactions, or transfer the money, etc. Right? So it's a domestically as well as internationally also. We don't need to really put so much of effort in making the money transfer, right? So I welcome everyone actually for this wonderful session, and I would like to request my co-panelists actually to introduce themselves quickly so that we can get into the wonderful discussion now. So over to you, to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Srihari, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for watching this and who are watching this particular panel session. My name is Venugopal. I'm the CISO of Equitas Small Finance Bank. Uh, I've been taking care of this role for the last few months. And again, this is an interesting topic when it comes to banks. You know that it's a supply chain, as Srihari had put across. It's not just the banks who are actually servicing the customer, but we have a lot of intermediaries in between, like fintech partners, the technology partners, the BZs, all those folks, right? So I would like to hear from the esteemed partner, panelists here, and also hear the views from the audience. Um, so we hope to learn a lot. Thanks, Srihari.
Thank you. Thank you. So Ritu, if you can quickly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Srihari. My name is Ritu Verma. I'm heading compliance at Newtap Finance Private Limited. First of all, would like to thank DSCI for having me here as part of this panel. An esteemed panel to be part of, and very interesting topic to be discussed. Looking forward to the discussion with the panelists, and hope audience will have a lot of questions. We can answer them.
So Swati, you.
Thank you, Srihari. My name is Swati Sharma. Most of people know me as Swati Anucharya. I'm taking care of regulated business, especially the payment business for Amazon in Middle East, South Africa, and Singapore region. I'm also supporting some of the India-specific security, regulatory, and compliance requirement, mostly in the payment space. I have been into payment space for almost 12 years, and the Indian space, Indian payment security space, I have actually seen the transition. So I think this topic is going to be interesting.
Very nice, Swati. I think we are having the right mix of panelists, right? One from bank and one actually leader in the e-commerce and the payments. Is actually one in the payment technologies, right? So very interesting, Swati. Actually, you touched upon you have seen the international and as well as the Indian landscape, right? So just I would like to start with that how regulators regulations whether it's global as well as outside countries as well as in India, right? And how the different standards help uh, to actually jumpstart to look at what are the risks are actually associated with the supply chains, with the third parties, and how do we secure the transactions and make sure that customers gets the best experience. So if you can give some brief about that.
Sure. So I'll start with the recent RBI regulation which came for service providers, right? So if you look at RBI regulation in last 3 to 5 years, they have been specifically focusing on the payment entities. There have been regulation for payment security, which came in 2020, and in 21 they have talked about payment security for the service provider specific guidelines. On top of that, they have been regulating the new set of entities which were not regulated and playing important role as a fintech, right? So they came up with a new set of guidelines for new entity which is called payment aggregator and payment gateway segment, which was actually largely handling the transactions at the small merchant and mid-sized merchants. So from the regulator side, I think they have understood that this space has been a critical for the organization, for the uh, country, and they have been focusing on that. What is the benefit of these regulations, right? So with the help of these regulations, entities are able to enforce the security controls with the standard practice. So you can ensure that the controls which are being implemented are kind of established, and the level of security or compliance requirements are being implemented. So I think with these, lot of entities are securing their infrastructure, third parties are improving their security posture. If I talk about international industry standards, so PCI DSS has been leading, right? So I think that is one of the standard which has been kind of very granular, specific, and they have been talking about all 12 domains of security. They have started from the network security. They talk about vulnerability management, patch management, application security, encryption of certain set of data, policy management, people and awareness. So with these controls, at least the minimal set of the controls are implemented in the organizations. And on top of that, organizations can do risk assessment and understand what is required, and they can customize the security requirements and then implement it in their environment. But with the regulations, I think at least the minimal baseline is set, and entities are able to improve the security posture with those baselines.
So that's right, Swati. But thing is, in the supply chain of payment transactions, right? There are number of players are involved, who don't know anything about regulations, right? So, for example, actually, we have a last mile chain delivery, right? There will be like a Pizza Hut delivery, right? Well, like that, we have actually people who do the onboarding, etc., right? And who is and also there are some service provider who are involved, uh, the courier boys, right? Or it can be a kind of SMS delivery, right? So you have actually all types of third parties involved, right? Some can be very knowledgeable about regulations, and some may not understand, are not sensitive about what is that payment security about. They may not be knowing what is data security at all, right? So my question
Exactly.
to Venu, that when as a banking person, so when how do you manage actually the threats emanating out of involving different varieties of third parties involved in this supply chain of transactions? Uh, what is that, how as a how, what is your program actually? How do you run your risk management programs to control the risks involving these third parties?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the key difference in a CISO of a bank when compared to what is a CISO of a bank earlier is that earlier it used to be purely on the security aspects of the organizations and all. Now the change, the shift in terms of the perception which we need to bring in is about how we are able to integrate security to the customer experience. Right? It's no more you are having accounts and then you service those accounts or service those customers, but you also need to integrate seamlessly the security part without the customer knowing that there is a security aspects which is hindering or which should not disturb the security or the service function, right? So that is one of the main aspects when it comes to the role of CISO over the period of few years we can see. Now, when it comes to the payment ecosystem, there are multiple stakeholders throughout the life cycle of the payments ecosystem. Like there are some of these changes are some of the stakeholders have a direct relation with the payment transactions. Some of them will be, as you said, is a last mile connectivity. They may not know the regulations, they may not know the security, or they may not be conscious on the security aspects. So how do you actually bring up and then get a visibility of that third party who is providing that service end to end is one of the key areas. So what are the stakeholders involved in a particular service from a banking standpoint is one of the key area which we need to which we have to figure out as a risk management program. Then there should be a formal risk program, risk management program, in terms of whenever we are actually offering any service, it has to go through a clearance from the risk management, made operation, made cybersecurity, made the other aspects of the banking operations. So the risk management need to be integrated part of the service delivery or service commissioning part of the process. So that's the first part. The second part is with respect to the kind of contract which we agree with the third parties, right? We might have some set of perception when we are actually signing up an agreement or when we are actually going and discussing with the partner at the initial stage. But over the period of time, the business would have added additional functionalities, additional capabilities. Now how do you keep track of it, and how do you ensure that you have an agreement which covers the entire scope of the activities is involved the third parties is another part, right? So having a formal agreement covering all the scope of work and the roles and responsibilities of each of the stakeholders in the third party supply chain is important. Next, with respect to your SLAs and metrics, right? So how do you ensure those services have been offered from or taken from the customers are being provisioned as per the service level agreements? There should be a metrics need to be defined, at the initial stage, like what will be the availability period, what number of transactions which you may have to, sort of cater to. So those sort of informations need to be agreed on. Then obviously, with respect to bank, it's again the bank's reputation is at stake, so there should be a penal provisions and other aspects need to be part of the agreements. And the right to audit is also an important point when it comes to partner, third party, or technical partner, engagements. So we should be able to go and then do a review of their service practice or security practices at their premises. That's one part. And in case if any of these services involves any kind of software acquisitions, then you may also have to think about some sort of escrow agreement, right? So that the source code is available and supported in case the vendor, the third party, is going out of business or not providing service anymore. So that's also very one of the key element when it comes to third party assessment standpoint. And with respect to the operations side of things, so basically we typically conduct the design level reviews and the implementation reviews. Design level reviews primarily involves how the connectivity is established, what are the data flow areas, what type of data they will be carrying out. Will they do tokenizations when we are actually sending out? How we are actually encrypt those particular data points, and where they are storing, how long they will be storing. Are they meeting certain regulatory requirements, like as Swati mentioned about the digital payment security controls of the RBI, and all those things will be checked at that point in time. And the other aspect is in terms of the continuity of operations. You have seen, right, the service provider is the third party is also giving you the service, and you are depending on them for reaching out to your customer. The customer is able to reach out. So the business continuity program and the criticality, the crown jewels of your systems, how do you ensure that those systems are available during the worst time, is something which is important to test at that point of time. And then in terms of the data protection, the privacy of the data, how they are actually taking up that data and then processing the data, all those stuff is also important. With respect to India, of course, you have the the localization, data localization. So this is also an important point when it comes to engaging with a third-party provider who is having a cloud-related presence, right? So if they have a cloud presence, then naturally you need to see how they are storing, where they are storing. So those regulatory requirements need to be looked into. Then data retention part. So how long they will be keeping it. So suppose I don't want to go, go ahead with that service provider, will they be retaining those data points, post that service? So those aspects need to be looked into. So these are some of the areas which we touch upon when we do the risk assessment. And based on the criticality of the third party, we'll also do some sort of a ratings in terms of each of the vendors. And some of the very high sensitive and critical vendors we do on a very frequent basis. Some, third parties who are not very critical for us in terms of operation or in terms of service, we'll do more of a self-test or self-assessment kind of mode. So that's the program which we have now.
So, Venu, I think you summarize that the risk is the fundamental element in understanding how do we manage the third parties, and to make sure that the security as well as the availability are sensitized actually with the third parties, so that will give the best and seamless experience to the customers. And you'll use the regulations to ensure that regulatory requirement to uh, pass these requirements and track the compliance of your third parties based on the applicability and based on the the criticality of those third parties. Wonderful. I mean, you have summarized everything about how to manage the third party risk. But now actually I will go a little bit technical, right? Because for our the benefit of our audience, uh, so what is the supply chain of transactions means, right? For example, if you are transferring some money, right, from here to some remote area in, I mean, there's no remote area actually, some remote bank actually, making some kind of tuition fee or some kind of purchasing something, or it can be a traders who actually clear their dues or actually make some kind of international payments. Right? It can be anything, right? So how all this supply chain of transactions are actually for example, in earlier days, you deposit a check in a remote location, right? It used to take 7 to 10 days or maybe 15 days outstation check. Why? Because there was someone actually make a ledger entry and they send the check to the either RBA to the nearest clearing house. Actually, it goes all the way to the the bank where this check belongs to. Again, it comes back. It passes the same route, and ultimately it will take 15 days to get your check cleared, outstation check, right? Remember we do those days, right? So I request Ritu to throw some light on how the switching networks, right? How the different payment networks are involved, right? Uh, in making this, whether it's a cross border or actually with an internal, how actually people are able to make transactions with the lighting speed, right? So Ritu, over to you uh, to enlighten the audience here.
Thanks,
Ritu.
Srihari.
Thank you.
Uh, like with over a decade of experience, I have worked with traditional Indian banks, with international banks, with fintech companies in India. I have seen that transition happening in the financial system ecosystem in the country. Like we used to deposit checks, we used to go to bank, like you mentioned in the earlier, like there used to be token, we used to stand in the queues to either withdraw cash or deposit cash, etc. Now it is just at a click of button. Like you can transfer payments via UPI to another individual. You can make payment to a merchant just by scanning a QR code. It looks very simple at the front end, very customer friendly, uh, uh, easy to use, etc. But at the back end of that, there are a lot of things happening which customer is not aware of. There are a lot of players which are getting involved in making this transaction a very seamless transaction. There are banks, there are intermediaries involved. At times, there are third-party service providers involved. Those all are coming together to make these transactions happen at the pace at which they are happening right now. And because of that, there are multiple touch points for that particular transaction. So the transaction is moving from one place to another. At times, even the funds are flowing. In the entire process, the risk is my data could get leaked. There is another party to whom the data is flowing to. And likewise, there are multiple parties who are accessing a customer's data. So recently, I was reading a report, a UK research report, which was on how comfortable the customers are with the third party service providers, how they are managing the data, etc. So 48% of the customers are not really comfortable of their data being shared with the third party service provider, which is a huge number to say so. And the reasons were multiple, that malicious third party could access a customer's data. There could be a data leak in between. There could be fraud associated with that. So those were multiple reasons. What happens is, though we are trying to provide a seamless experience to the customer, the security is becoming a concern day by day, because data is moving at multiple locations. Which, even if today we go ahead and ask the customer, Like you have this XYZ information, to whom it belongs to. You have a bank account, to whom it belongs to. Customer has to say that it belongs to me. Most of the customers do not understand that it's their data, it's their information, which is flowing around in the system. Like Venu recently mentioned, it is very critical that regulated entities at least conduct regular audits on their third-party service providers. They also ensure that there are proper checks and balances within the system so that their customer data is secure. Because it is quite possible that everyone in the leg of transaction is not getting regulated by the regulator, so they do not have same set of regulation being imposed on them. So it's becoming critical day by day to have those regulations in place wherein uh, we we ensure as financial service providers that customers' data is highly secure. It's not going out in the market to third party without customer knowing that.
Right. So I think, so what is behind the, the transactions, the QR code, I think well explained, Ritu. Right. So basically, we have the earlier we used to have static QR codes, now dynamic QR codes. So you don't even need to enter the amount, etc. Right. So there's a lot of work actually, happened at NPCI and other players also, which makes actually the transactions seamless, right? So wonderful. Ritu, I just would like to extend the question here that as we have seen that how the interconnection of the complex the networking and ecosystem will enable the technology enablement actually makes customer experience so seamless, right? So just I want to extend because of your experience. You worked in some of these networking technologies. So so just request to throw some light on what is this open banking is, right? What is this about that Setu APIs that we have been hearing, right? How it makes the interbanking or actually the payment transactions secure and successful. If you can just, sorry for extending this question, if you can throw some light on that.
No, Srihari, happy to take that. Of late, we have been hearing a lot about open banking APIs. So basically, these are it's a technology platform which helps financial institutions connect to fintech entities to provide financial products to the customers in a more seamless way, in a faster way. So say if I want to reach out to a customer as a fintech entity, want to integrate with a bank, I did not develop the entire technology infrastructure to integrate with the banking system uh, in today's point, or any financial services system. I can just use APIs, that is application programming interface. That's an interface that helps connect. It acts as a bridge between two entities, to put it very simply, wherein by joining that bridge, you can provide facilities of those financial services on a platform which fintech feels that it is more user friendly, more customer friendly, and it has a multiple kind of use cases while reaching out to different segment of the customers, or defining use cases as per the utility of the customer base. So API or application program interfaces is basically helping uh, various entities to reach out to different segment of the customers, and hence like increase financial inclusion in the country. Today we have seen that the mobile usage has increased to a greater extent, and if an application can be developed which is more user friendly, easy to use, etc., and then I can provide a consolidated experience to a customer to make them understand that these are the products which I'm offering via my platform. For you to use, you need not travel like miles to get access to the banking technology or banking services. This is just at a click of the button. APIs are helping various entities do that. They're acting as a bridge between a financial institution and these fintechs. Again, in terms of security concerns, definitely these pipes has to be very very strong and secured from again data leak perspective. There should not be frauds happening. There should not be hacking. There should not be like cloning of information or websites happening, etc. So they need to take care of these aspects, and at the same time that they're providing very very good infrastructure in linking financial institutions to a user friendly interface and reaching to the mass of the India.
I mean, sorry, it's very useful, Ritu. I think it's a rightly asked question. I think you have, I mean, enlightened. Actually, very nice information you have passed. So here, like many CISOs today, what they face is actually that the product teams keep innovating, right? Coming up with the new ideas, right? And whenever they see some kind of a new ecosystem or actually new offering, right? It can be AI or machine learning based, actually that which will improve the customer experience. And also there is a intensive competition, right? Offering something new to the customers always, right? Uh, so actually, but there are many regulations around that, right? So some example is that we have some dichotomy of privacy versus KYC, right? So the business actually, we always have a confusion whether to consider Aadhaar card, right, as a sensitive information, but at the same time, uh, if you ask for the address proof or a proof of identity, people give the Aadhaar card, right? And if you use the Aadhaar card, then you are actually falling under some kind of criminal offenses, right? So because you cannot keep the Aadhaar card image in your system, and you have to redact it, you have to encrypt it, right? If you don't do all these things, you will be actually on the other side of law, right? Similarly, actually, people try to bring in number of ecosystems outside, right? Some very good actually geotagging, right? Or geotagging with that actually people want to give some kind of offers, right? So if you are passing in front of a Pizza Hut, then you will get a Domino's pizza vouchers, right? Or it can be like if you are visiting a medical store a couple of times and immediately you want to be directed to some kind of offers in the healthcare, right? So what happens is actually there is uh, the marketing or the product people always looking out that how can I make my customers experience better, right? How do I offer something new, right? I mean, how to make someone's life happy, right? But at the same time, actually, they will, there can be some pitfalls, right? There can be overstepping on some kind of other regulations or some kind of RBA regulations or some kind of data violations, etc., right? So my question to Swati that how do you ensure that uh, first actually there is a innovation happens, then you say sorry, right? You can't innovate right? So hang on, come back, right? So how do you sensitize your internal people that before or a shift left or actually or fail past, that look, don't go, actually there is a possible violations, right? Or possible threats we are actually buying in, right? So just what I request you that how do you sensitize your internal stakeholders on the security aspects involved in the supply chains of transactions.
I think this is very interesting question. So I think there has to be balance, right? So as you said, that innovation will not stop, and if you try to do that, probably you will be replaced. Security exists if business exists, and vice versa nowadays, right? But if security or CISO, if they'll try to stop the innovation with the like perception of security threats, I think that's not going to work. So they need to play an important role understanding what is exactly required. So sometime, and actually most of the time, that the CISOs are from the tech background or from the compliance background, but they are not from the legal background, right? So I think taking help of our legal friends and lawyers to understand what actually regulation is saying, and then explaining that to the tech stakeholders, other tech stakeholders, and what can be the viable optimal solution in terms of business experience, customer experience, and keeping the innovation on track. I think that's the important role that CISOs have to play. CISO is no more just a tech role, right? It has to be aligned with the business objective, and at the same time they need to balance out the risk which may emerge from the business perspective or from the regulatory and compliance perspective. So I think understanding what is required, because I have worked as consultant for a long time in my previous employment roles, and I understand sometimes CISOs may have heard it from somewhere and they assume that it is the law or it is actually the guideline which has came from the regulator or from the government agency, and they may not have actually seen the regulation itself. So I think going back to regulation, taking actual guidance from the legal team can help some of these issues easily, and then explaining what exactly is required, and then balancing out the business outcome and the regulatory security risk. There may be some technology which are evolving, right? So where you see a technology which is evolved and regulators have not been very clear in terms of black and white requirements, for those technologies, I believe the risk assessments are the lifesavers, right? You can start with the risk assessment, understand what exactly the risks are associated, and what are the regulatory obligation written, what is the objective, security objective, and then documenting those requirements clearly, addressing the risk, mitigating some of those risks, and understanding what is your risk appetite, what can be accepted. I think that is the step that can take care of a lot of these requirements. But one thing that we have to understand, that we have to align the security objectives, the regulatory compliance objective with overall business objective. Uh, you cannot just have security control without business running.
Right, Swati. Thank you. That's right, actually. So the security actually, should it is like a brake theory, they call it, right? So a good security or a good brake actually makes the car run faster, right?
Exactly.
So we'll be actually enabling the business, and we'll help to interpret the regulations in the right sense, uh, and we sensitize people actually in the right time, so that uh, it actually regulations help them to innovate faster and go to market faster, right? So some of the numbers earlier I have mentioned, actually, it's all talks about success story, about 40 billion transactions, 40% of transactions are happening in India, right? So, but the ugly picture is that we have some 7,200 major fintech frauds happened actually, last 1 year, right? And India also one of the leading uh, country for financial frauds, right? Whether it's a Nigerian or Pakistani, actually, they like actually India as the best market to, whether it can be, you know, uh, I mean, it's actually all types of frauds, right? And also, we have recently witnessing some kind of PG has been compromised, right? Uh, some I don't know what is the amount, around a crore or 6 crores actually has been siphoned from the different banks. And also, in the supply chain of transaction, we have seen that the compromise happened in one bank's switching network, but actually, the victim bank is someone else, right? So this is what is actually, the dichotomy, or the sad part about this, the logistics or supply chain of transactions, right? Not necessarily that the compromise happens one place, not necessarily that the same people will be impacted. That what measures can be taken, right? Keeping in mind that the different frauds are actually being reported, different people are being victimized. Of course, the law enforcement agencies are also catching up very fast. Not like earlier that there was a confusion and all. Today, the cyber cell is also acting very fast, right? That is the clear indication that how we get the different mails are actually, when the police actually connect with us to stop payment actually, you know, uh, in time. Many times actually, the money will go away, but still, there are some cases actually that the money has been blocked from going off. Etc. Right, so this can be taken, or actually further strengthening of the payment services can happen at the payment gateways, right, to ensure that we'll minimize the frauds. Right, over to you,
Sorry, Srihari, I lost you in between, but I believe we're talking about the how do you actually measure the security of?
Yeah. So, how do you actually strengthen the security of e-commerce transactions or some payment gateway services, etc. In your view?
Sure. So broadly, from I mean, not just payment gateway, but also in terms of the partner and our service providers, how do we measure it? Basically, on the number of events and failures of the events, as well as number of frauds and incidents which happen. So that's how we have a rating systems in place when we are actually engaging with any of those new services, and when we are engaging with the payment gateway services, we do have ratings, aspects, and we'll also see how it has been performed in the past. When it comes to information security, was there any breach happened? Was the payment gateway provider has been involved in any kind of an incident in the past? And all those aspects will be looked into. Second is to monetize, and how do we actually measure the kind of transactions which is going through that payment gateway, and how do they actually enhance our services? Was there any payment failures happen, recurrent payment failures that are happening from that particular service provider, and all those aspects will be looked into. Now, from a technical standpoint, if you refer to the recent few incidents where we observed that some of the payment gateway, breaches, by hackers that happened, is primarily with respect to six basic threats. One is with respect to the intercepting the transaction data. If they don't have an adequate encryption and other, secured mechanisms, so breaches will happen through, the exposing the data. So, typically in a payment ecosystems, we have, multiple encryption and decryption cycles happening, right? So if they are not done this in the entire complex ecosystems, at some point, on a pre-period, the data will be exposed. So we have seen, the attackers were able to sort of get hold of that particular data, manipulate it, and then, due to the integrity part of the data, or modifying the data, and then replaying those attacks, and then ensure that they are able to sort of get successful response back to the issuer, right? So that kind of attacks is something which are seen of late. So intercepting the transaction data is one of the prime, risks which you have seen in the payment security gateways side of things. The second aspect is with respect to the merchant, the devices and other aspects. So how the software updates are actually being pushed to that. So what kind of change control they have. The software updates have been probably is being signed by the vendor. There are cases like Verizon, for example, it happened in 2014, where unauthorized changes were made into the customer, merchant devices. So that kind of aspects will be looked into. Third, primarily into the credential management. Primarily, although we call it as a passwordless, age, we still use password for many of those, transactions and many of our systems, internally as well as externally. Now, how do we actually strengthen the passwords? How are we adding, two-factor authentications? And how do we treat the credentials in our organizations? And what mechanism a customer will get to reset those passwords, or, how the fraudsters will make use of that particular password reset process the flow in the process is something which need to be looked into. So that's another aspect which is an important from a risk standpoint. Third is with respect to the attacking the data at rest. While we know that many times when you are actually developing a program or when you're developing a system, we might have encrypted the transaction data in transactions, but data at rest will be often taken, granted. Right? So wherever we are actually storing, let's say we are storing in cloud environment, we need to ensure that the data is encrypted, and selective encryption or tokenization of a sensitive data, PA data, also need to be looked into. So that is something which, we would have seen, like many of these databases been exposed. Attackers are able to do some sort of SQL injection and get hold of the database and then expose multiple customer database and publish in the black market and all those stuff. So that's something which need to be looked into. And obviously, next is with respect to intercepting the data in motion, right? So how do we, it's typical payment ecosystems, there are at least 4 or 5 different transaction points where the encryption and decryption happens. And all these are vulnerable points. So how do we treat and how do we ensure end-to-end encryption, or how do we ensure that the integrity of the data is being retained throughout the life cycle or throughout the touch points in the payment ecosystem is also important. Next is, as you mentioned, is about the interbank transactions. So how do we secure those interbank transactions? Again, a very recent incident about issuer bank response modifications, where a major payment gateway was been breached, is again with respect to the integrity of the message response part, right? So if some of this HTML hidden, sensitive data is being quoted or obscured in our HTML hidden pages, the attacker is able to sort of modify those particular codes and then replay those attacks or give a wrong, data back.
We call it parameter manipulation. Very simple thing. So, and the response modification, right? So, some interesting questions someone is asking, because you are saying this, that how often you actually ensure that your third parties perform the VAPT tests on their infrastructure, who are involved in this payments. So, what is your answer to that?
Yeah. So. And the regulators, especially RBA, had their view is that if we have actually outsourced this to a third party for any of our services, the same level of security control and the regulatory requirements need to be extended to our partners as well. So going by that, the VAPT need to be constructed on a half-yearly basis if we have web applications and all, and penetration testing need to be done on an annual basis. So it's an extension of our regulations. If they are handling our sensitive information, those rules also apply, and it has to be done through a certain empaneled vendor.
So you will be happy in case they have a certain empaneled vendor doing a PT, which is actually in line with the regulator, right? So I think that answers the question. And someone is asking a question that very interesting, that how do you ensure that there is no ransomware enters through your third parties, right, into your network, because you are participating in the supply chain of transaction. Very interesting, actually. So we should not keep your systems really open for ransomware to enter. So in a supply chain of transactions, we limit the services only for a specific messages only, right? Whether we call it web application firewall or the input validation of the expected fields in the XML format, right? So we don't expect a ransomware to happily enter. And there's something called zero trust security, that the systems which are involved in payment transactions are reasonably isolated, and we keep air gap around that even the administrators cannot actually enter into the systems, only through a VDI or that's what we call it, a reasonable level of air gap, right? Some very interesting questions. Someone is putting actually firewall question actually continuously, but I don't know, maybe there could be an error. How do you balance end users or merchants user interface with the enforcement of various security mechanisms? If the question is that end users are merchants UI with the enforcement of various mechanisms, yes. very interesting because the customers, whether the net banking or whether it can be report generation, etc., you have an interface for the customers. Similar, the merchants has a larger features, right? For example, they may want to do the refund of transactions, or they want to do some kind of reconciliation. They want to generate the reports, or they want to file the GST returns, right, on the transaction what they did, right? Or they maybe want to raise some disputes, right? Uh, right. So this is very important, so particularly in the merchant, right? Merchants sometimes can be a little bit callous, right? There will be a merchant who will be having some 10, 15 people recruited and doing the transactions on their behalf. Imagine there is a rogue employee actually, perform some kind of refunds of all the transactions, right? Whether it is for benefit or without the benefit, right? So here some of these questions are actually partially addressed. Some of the measures are like two-factor authentication using the OTP, right? So merchants will have an elevated authentication. As Venu is saying that password is the center of majority of the problems in this universe still, right? So that's the reason there is a two-factor authentication, and also the kind of counters, the technologies service providers implement, so that there is always the syncing of where the transactions are last performed. Right, these are the few things. I can't really detail them in this session because there are a lot of complexities actually involved. It takes time to explain, uh, and there are some good number of other questions. Many banks, other companies. So how the regulators and are helping in making the transactions successful. India and the RBI is slightly ahead of the curve, right? For example, P2P standard, which is very stringent, right? It requires the keys to be moved from triple desk to the AES, etc., right? And India is one of the first country where we are forcing the terminal service providers actually to upgrade their terminals quickly before the June 30th, right? Uh, so I think we are. I wish there are a lot of questions actually shooted, in the last 5 minutes.
So
Sorry, I
I
could not
think
answer all those questions.
I think with the interest of time, we need to close this session. So we may take these questions offline, and attendees can connect with the panelists offline as well. So thank you to all the panelists for such an interactive and great session. It was a great learning for all of us. And thank you to the attendees for making this session interactive with the questions. So with that, would like to close that session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining in this session.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank you,
everyone.
Thank you
Harshna,
all.
and
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, panelists. It's a wonderful session. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Exit. Exit stays.